Good morning, risers. As many of you viewers know, we normally pre-tape our Friday content due to the way all of our schedules work. Ryan and Robbie could not join today, but I wanted to bring you some updates about what's happening in Ukraine. So last night, President Biden addressed the nation denouncing Russia's actions and announced tougher sanctions. Let's listen.
Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose this war, and now he and his country will bear the consequences. Today, I'm authorizing additional strong sanctions and new limitations on what can be exported to Russia. This is going to impose severe cost on the Russian economy, both immediately and over time. We have purposely designed these sanctions to maximize the long-term impact on Russia and to minimize the impact on the United States and our allies.
Meanwhile, Russian forces continue to advance on Ukraine territory, as well as launching missile strikes throughout the night. Ukrainians in the capital of Kiev are sheltering in air raid shelters as of this morning. That's according to CNN. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy issued another video message this morning, urging resistance to the Russian invasion and criticizing Ukraine's allies once again. Here's what he had to say.
Я запитав сьогодні у 27 лідерів Європи, чи буде Україна в НАТО. Запитав прямо. Всі бояться, не відповідають, а ми не боїмось. Ми не боїмось нічого. Не боїмось, захищаючи нашу державу. Ми не боїмось Росії. Ми не боїмось говорити з Росією. Ми не боїмось говорити про все. Про гарантії безпеки для нашої держави. Не боїмось говорити про нейтральний статус. Ми ж зараз не в НАТО, але...
And we have with us senior fellow and military expert at the Defense Priorities, retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, joining us to discuss. Welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. So things are very tense going on right now in Ukraine. There's a lot of various reports coming out. I think a big question that many of us have is what should be happening at this point? We're not seeing any of the European allies or the US rushing in to help defend Ukraine. What do you think should be happening?
Yeah, this really all ties together with what should have happened, what may have actually precluded war altogether, and what should definitely happen now. And that is the foundational point is that Ukraine is never coming in NATO. It was never coming in NATO. It's been obvious from the beginning. All the NATO countries have been outspoken in claiming that and telling Zelenskyy very unambiguously no help would be coming. So before Russia ever crossed the border, he knew that he was going to be on his own. Now, at that time, he should have done whatever he had to do, made whatever negotiations to preclude that, whether that was declare neutrality, whether that was to declare that he will never join NATO, whatever it would have taken, he could have done that. And almost certainly that would have kept Putin out, because Putin's unambiguous point from 2007, for 15 years, has been no NATO on my border in Ukraine. But nobody was willing to take that off the table. We should have taken it off the table for Zelenskyy if he wouldn't do it, but we didn't. And now we are where we are. Now, I personally kind of have a problem with Zelenskyy trying to sound like a brave combat leader, telling his people to resist against a very professional armored force coming in from Russia that his own forces can't handle, because all he's going to do is get more people killed, and it won't change the outcome. He's not going to win because he won't have any help. His forces can't stop it. Now, this morning, just hours ago, Zelenskyy actually floated the idea of being willing to negotiate a neutrality issue agreement with Russia. Russia immediately picked up on that and said, yes, we are willing to discuss that. We'll set something up at Minsk and we'll send delegations and discuss it. He should take that without any more hesitation. He should not get any more of his people killed in a fight they can't win.
Yeah, I'm glad you've said this, and I totally agree with you. I've actually been dragged on Twitter for the last few hours because I said this exact thing, where this is a losing battle for Ukraine. They cannot win this. It's inevitable that Russia will reach its military goals in this conflict. And the only thing that will happen is Ukrainians will be killed in the process. Right now, Russia is targeting, it looks like, their military bases and military equipment. It's like you kind of have to just let that go, I suppose. I mean, it's a tough situation. I get it for the Ukrainian people. They definitely don't want to be under the thumb of Russia, but at the same time, you also don't want to be killed by Russia either. And so it's a very
right. And look, here's the bigger issue with that. Look, no one is saying you have to become a vassal of Russia.
right.
All Russia was even asking was just be neutral, like Finland. Finland is completely free. Austria did the same thing under the Soviet Union. They were completely free. Nobody took their freedom away from them. Nobody was going to take it away from Ukraine either. They could have had this without bloodshed, but they wouldn't take it. And NATO was not willing to just state the obvious and say we're not going to give it to them. We could have prevented it, but nobody took action. And now we are where we are.
Yeah, and it seems like things are escalating a little bit. Especially maybe not with Zelenskyy. I think I've always really liked Zelenskyy. I think he's a really great leader. What I really admire about him right now is I've seen photographs of him on the front lines, putting on the gear. He has one aspect about this that is also really precarious for the Ukrainian people is that they're being forced to fight in this battle that they don't really want to fight in. They do have conscripted service in Ukraine. Zelenskyy has said they've actually banned men 18 to 60 from leaving the country. They've called them back into the front lines. A lot of them were fleeing with their families. They were told you can't flee, you have to come back and you have to check in with the military to make sure that you're ready for battle. So, I mean, at least he's not a hypocrite. He's telling people you're going to have to do it. And so he's doing it as well. But it seems that a lot of the rhetoric is that Russia's going to take Ukraine. Russia's going to make it a part of the, trying to rebuild the USSR again. What is your take on that?
Yeah, there's no substance to that at all. That's lots of claims, especially in the West, and that's been used as a lot of justification to send 14,000 U.S. troops now into Eastern European countries, the European countries of NATO, to bolster that. To now people are talking about adding to the defense budget in the United States to build it up. There is no evidence that Putin has any interest in attacking a NATO country. To the contrary, he has repeatedly and consistently said he wants to put a buffer between him and NATO. He doesn't want to go take NATO because he doesn't have the force structure to do that. He doesn't have anywhere near enough troops to attack anybody beyond Ukraine. In fact, he doesn't really have enough to take all of Ukraine. That would be probably a bridge too far. But he certainly isn't going to go into NATO because he knows 1 inch into NATO equals a fight against 30 nations. And he doesn't have that ability, and he won't try it because he's not stupid. He does calculate he can take part of Ukraine, and that's what he's doing. And he's so far it's showing like it's probably a good risk on his point. Now, There is one thing, though, I'd like to say, just to clarify one point. There is only one person who's responsible for this, and it's not NATO. It's not even Zelenskyy. It's Vladimir Putin, because he could have negotiated. He could have done a lot of other things. He chose war. People are died because of Vladimir Putin and nobody else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is definitely his war. He's definitely decided to go into Ukraine. Something I admit, I did not think that he was actually going to invade Ukraine. I was wrong about that. I really thought that this, and maybe he wouldn't have had we actually come to the table and said, we're not going to have Ukraine. I think he's been thinking, and this is kind of the dangerous part, is he clearly has been thinking 10 steps ahead. So he amassed all the troops on the border and thought, okay, we're going to continue to have this discussion. If they're not willing to have it, if they're not willing to back down from this, then here's what I'm going to do. It's like a chess game to him. So I'm worried about what the next move is. I'm curious, do you think he's going to actually try to depose the government in Ukraine and put in a more pro-Russian government? We know that in 2014, there was a US-backed coup to put in a pro-Western leader. Do you think that that's the game plan here? First demilitarize and then depose and put in a different government.
Let me answer that question. But first, let me touch on something you just said, because you are dead spot on. Look, Putin has been saying throughout this whole thing, and I mean, going back to April of last year when he first started putting troops up there and building in strength all the way up through to the final area, that he wanted written guarantees that NATO would not advance up to his border. So he sent us these requested instruments of negotiation in December, and he said, here's the things I want to talk about here. The problem that we had is that we would not even discuss his number one issue of no NATO in Ukraine on his border. They tried additional rounds of negotiation. And one of the last things that Biden said was, again, we're willing to discuss this, except the only thing that Putin cares about. And Putin had planned all the way through that if he was rebuffed all the way through, it was a big enough deal to him that he was willing to risk war. And so he was prepared to go. But if we had just been willing to negotiate on the issue, then I think that there is every reason to think he would not have gone. Now, to answer your second question there, I think that the best evidence that we can have of what Putin wants to do now in terms of does he want to have a, depose the leader, have a regime change, is look what he did in Georgia in 2008. So the circumstances were nearly identical to what they are here. He went into two provinces, South Ossetia and Abkhazia, in that case, instead of Donetsk and Luhansk. He sent troops in there, had a fight, expressly did not go into all of Georgia, didn't have a general war, didn't try to take it over, but had a significant wounding and damaging of the Georgian armed forces, then withdrew his troops back into South Ossetia and Abkhazia, and then that's where they stayed there. All he wanted to do was keep Georgia out of Ukraine, out of NATO. Now I think he's going to do the same thing, is that he wants to have a deal with Zelenskyy. They can keep whoever they want in power in there as long as he gets his guarantee and his promise that they're not going to go to NATO. He'll then withdraw his troops and go back into Donetsk and Luhansk, because he has said, and repeatedly to, I believe even today and certainly yesterday, Putin has, that he does not have any intention to occupy the country. Now, he lies about so many things, but this is one area I'm sure he's telling the truth, because it's in his self-interest too. He does not want to spend the money and the headache and the loss of troops over time that would entail. So I think that's what we're going to end up seeing.
I have to ask you, how much of Nord Stream 2 do you think this has to do with this, his advances into Ukraine? I tend to think there's a lot that the pipelines have a lot to do with this. I do think that he's kind of saying the same thing to the Russian people, that a lot of the lip service that we sort of get here in the United States, the humanitarians. So he's kind of saying to the Russian people, well, I'm going in there because we have to denazify Ukraine, right? Which, what does that even mean? I mean, we know that there are a lot of Nazis in Ukraine, but how do you denazify Ukraine? And so he's giving a lot of lip service to the Russian people to kind of get them on board with what's going on. But I have a sneaking suspicion that a lot of this has to do with the pipelines. And when Europe, when Germany said, okay, we're not going to go forward with Nord Stream 2, which they'd already halted the inspections back in November, do you think that then gave him this, he was like, I've got nothing to lose now. I mean, now I only have everything to gain. Now I'm going to control all the pipelines, the ones running through Ukraine, Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, if you're going to cut me off.
Yeah, I think it was a factor. Without question, it was a factor. I mean, that's been a front and center of his talking points really all throughout this, because they've spent so much time and investment, to build the thing and set it up. But it's a factor and not a decisive factor, because they've already got pipelines that are running in there already. So gas is already transiting into Europe, and the pipeline wouldn't have changed that. It would have changed the route, and it would have certainly made a lot of money for some of the oligarchs. And so that's an interest of his. But he already possesses and still possesses the lifeline, the choking lifeline. He has the ability at any time, if this gets really bad, to tell Europe, okay, I'm just going to cut it off completely. I think that's one of the reasons we didn't go down the SWIFT path and cut them out of SWIFT, because we knew that they could retaliate by just saying, okay, I'm going to cut off the gas, and we'll see who suffers more pain. So let's hope we don't get to there.
We're still seeing calls for that, to cut them out of SWIFT, which the viewers don't know what that is. That's the payment system that would kind of cut Russia off from the world financial system. So, I mean, that to me would wage World War III. I mean, if you're going to go that route, that seems to be very, very aggressive.
And I certainly hope it wouldn't go that far, but I can tell you for sure, and I believe this is why it didn't happen up to this point, that is a double-edged sword. There's, so many people want to say these sanctions as though it's just a unilateral tool that we can apply and just say, yeah, he's going to get hurt, Putin. But those things have cut the other direction. All these payments to the European countries require SWIFT. So if they shut Russia off from SWIFT, they shut themselves off from getting paid for contracts that they've had and payments that they're due, into the future. So they're not going to want to do that either. And, in cutting off the gas and causing him to do that is going to also have dramatic impact on the economic output, especially of Germany and Italy, but throughout Europe as well. And that's one of the reasons why this is so hard for the West to figure out what to do.
Yeah. So a final question for you. What do you think? I mean, we started off the segment with this, with what do you think should be happening now with Ukraine? I mean, do you think they're actually going to maybe, I guess I should ask, how long do you think this is going to last? Do you think this is going to escalate, or do you think this is going to de-escalate, and when?
Well, it has a chance to go real fast. Just as a means of comparison, in May 1940, you had the two biggest powers in Europe, France and the UK armies, their field armies in France against the Germans facing off on the other side. That was over in about a week, effectively, because the military position got flipped because the Allied armies weren't ready. Something like that could happen here, and is in the process of possibly happening here, because so far it appears that Russia has a tactically very sound plan to bypass the cities, not attacking into them first, and instead carving up systematically the Ukrainian armed forces. Once you knock their armed forces out of it, now then Putin's field armies can do almost whatever they want. They can surround, they can attack at will, and all they have to worry about is, civilians throwing Molotov cocktails, which is why I say that's such a bad idea. But once he does this to the field armies, there's not much coordinated defense left.
Yeah, I mean, so he is being very strategic in taking out the military, the weaponry first, and then saying, okay, now you're disarmed. Now you have to talk. So hopefully this does move very, very fast. Thank you so much for joining us, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis. Thank you so much. And we will have more Rising after this.
Always my pleasure. Thank you.